Hey everyone, Pastor George here with today's Bible study recap. And today in Bible study, we looked at the book of Exodus, which is where we are reading this week. And we looked at Exodus 34. And there are two main themes that I want to pull out this morning. The first is God's favorite verse, or verses, I guess is what you could call them, because they're quoted a bunch of times in the Old Testament. It's the most referenced verse in the Old Testament. So like by future books, this formula will pop up quite a bit. And so it's important, I guess, if it's going to be popping up, that we should pay attention to where it originated and also kind of discuss the importance or interesting parts of that, because there's a lot going on here, more than I could actually cover in this morning's Bible study. Um, but so if you read Exodus 34, the big thrust of this chapter is the covenant being renewed. And when the covenant is renewed, this is because it was broken. If you remember, Moses meets with God on Sinai, and then the Israelites commit the sin of idolatry and worship another god. They break two of the 10 commandments right there, because they make an image to worship, which is the second commandment, at least in the traditional Reformed Protestant numbering. And they have another god, which is breaking the first commandment, right? So they break two commandments, and these commandments, or these covenants that God makes, are very much in the line of marriage contracts. They have marriage language in them, and so they've broken their vow, and so it has to be renewed, and that's what happens in this chapter. But one of the important things to remember is how God speaks about himself, because I think we really need to understand the character of God really, really well. And because we're going to see this in the Old Testament with Yahweh, and then we're going to see in the New Testament with Jesus, who is Yahweh incarnate. So it's important to see the similarities and like why this is something that ends up being the connector between the two, which is why we have Old and New Testaments. But the things that's referenced most in the Old Testament, and I quizzed the people this morning on this, but I'm not going to do that to you guys because you're just watching this online. But the verses to pay attention to are Exodus 34, 6, and 7, which in the ESV translation read like this. It says, "The Lord passed before him being Moses, and proclaimed, the Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, keeping steadfast love for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, but who will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children and on the children's children to the third and fourth generation." So that right there is the most referenced text in the Old Testament. You're going to see that pop up again and again. One of the interesting things to point out here, and this is why the theme of covenant is so important, is it uses the word in Hebrew chesed. So there in the ESV, they translated steadfast love. Mercy, sometimes how it's translated like merciful love or loyal love or covenant love. And it's this same concept of agape that we get in the New Testament. Of course, there are like language differences and things like that, but this is kind of the thing that goes through, is that God is going to be loyal and love people even though they sin against him. He's going to love them unconditionally, right? He's going to remake the covenant with them even though they have no reason to expect the covenant to be remade with them because they broke it, right? Just like if someone cheats on a spouse, there's no necessary reason why they should expect their spouse to forgive them, but God is the spouse who forgives, and that's the point there. Um, One of the things that is important or worth talking about are those two parts of these two verses that I read. The first part, I would imagine, is the part that we like hearing a lot more than the second part, where it talks about God bringing justice even to the third and fourth generation. And I don't want to dwell on it too much here, but there is a the way that this is quoted in other places shows that there's kind of two elements that are important. The first being God's mercy to people, but also God's justice to those who continue to deny him or not care about him, right? It's not so much saying that I'm going to punish children for the sins of their parents It's really more saying the sins carried down through generations, they're going to have consequences for a long time. But also, 3 or 4 generations from now, if they're not paying attention to me, I'll remember, like, I'll know that, and I will bring justice down upon them, right? So this is meant to be kind of God's character to show that he is merciful, but also he is a long arc of justice that he is going to enact in the world, right? Um, and so you see this given, and then you see a bunch of laws about unleavened bread and feasts and things like that. Uh, all of this is done in the importance of following this marriage contract, this covenant that's being made between the two, and it ends with Moses having a veil, right? Because he walks around veiled after meeting with God because his face shone, and that's not to keep people from being scared. It's but not to show the fading glory that's coming from him. And this is what Paul actually talks about in the New Testament. He connects this idea that the glory that we can have that is possible through this covenant is only possible in small bursts and fades because it's not really the complete fulfillment. Paul says the complete fulfillment comes in Jesus. And so Moses wears a veil not in order to keep people from being afraid of him or whatever, but in order for people to continue to fear the Lord, right? Because if they see the glory fade from Moses' face, they're going to be like, oh, all right, I guess it's not that big of a deal anyway, right? So you get it. Now, I did want to just bring up several other times that this verse is mentioned, and these verses are quoted over 20 times in different sections in different parts of the Bible. And I'm not going to be too thorough or in depth with this. I just want to give you the references. So if you're interested, you can go and look them up. But in Numbers 14, so just 2 books from what this is, Moses quotes it. And he he's asking God for mercy, and he quotes the second half. He actually says you'd think if he was asking for mercy, he would be like, oh, steadfast love, like all about that, right? But instead, he quotes the part about how you will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children, and the children's children to the 3rd and 4th generation. He quotes that, and then he says, because of your character, you will show mercy. And he it doesn't remind God of that, but he tells him that, and God does forgive the people. It's kind of an interesting little segment. It's not one you would think, but it's like, because God is just and he cares about justice, he will forgive and things like that. Very, very interesting part. Then in Deuteronomy 5, so again, in the Pentateuch, in the Torah, in the first 5 books of the Old Testament, Moses actually inserts it into the 10 Commandments because the 10 Commandments are given again. And so he actually inserts it there. This idea that behavior is crucial, and this is the way that God acts is the way that we're supposed to act. And he defines iniquity here, this idea of iniquity, as idolatry. So this idea of idolatry is really central to this way that God describes himself. In Joel, Joel also quotes this. He says that he's quoting, this would be in Joel 2. He's talking about all this bad stuff that's happening. And he says that it's a result of people not paying attention to this and doing this. But he says that God is going to be merciful. Again, quoting it, right? In Jonah, this is probably the least remembered part of Jonah. It's Jonah chapter 4. Jonah sarcastically quotes this because he's upset that God has forgiven the Ninevites, the Assyrians. And so he quotes this and he says, I know you're a God of steadfast love, right? And basically he's upset that this is how God's character is. And lastly, the prophet Nahum, he talks about how God is going to take vengeance on the oppressor, and he quotes this verse. And those are just 5 of the 20 times, and you'll even notice when you read those that it's different parts of them. Sometimes it's not the whole thing. So people will use this as ways of highlighting certain aspects of God's character. So this idea of God being merciful, but also just to the 3rd and 4th generation is really important. And also those other verses help clarify what this text is talking about, because you see how they applied it in their life. So all this is to say is that there's a lot going on in Exodus 34 that really does get at the heart of Exodus. Not only what I talked about on Sunday, where it's kind of repairing the tug of war break that the people of Israel had with God, but also the covenants that is being made with the people of Israel, as a marriage contract, and that it says a lot about God's character, and that's supposed to inform the way the people of Israel act. So I hope you enjoy reading it, and this has been helpful as a little guide for the section. And I hope you also have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday. I'll see you tomorrow for an episode of New Thing. Peace out.